Story 1. I grew up in a house where there was a lot of fighting, both verbal and physical. I do not enjoy fighting at all. Hearing people scream at each other brings back unpleasant memories. Story 2. Believing that criticism means I will be abandoned, especially if I am not perfect enough to be worthy of connection. Story 3. Slamming doors and cabinets and loud voices terrified me as a child growing up in an abusive home. Even now, as an adult, these things make me shut down. Story 4. If I feel like someone is seeking compliments or emotional support, I intentionally withhold it. This behavior stems from having a narcissistic mother and experiencing emotional and psychological abuse. It reflects a kind of demand avoidance. I feel repulsed by needy individuals. Story 5. Getting defensive and angry when accused of something or when my actions are questioned. I learned that from my dad. Story 6. Hyperindependence. I would sooner die than ask for help and risk being ridiculed or abandoned for it. Story 7. I often find myself apologizing when others have an accident, such as knocking over their glass of water. Growing up, everything felt like my fault, so this habit developed. Now that I am aware of it, I have managed to stop. Story 8. Pushing things away. I grew up in a household where my parents would fight all the time. We never spoke about their arguments as a family, but my brother and I would always try to raise our voices and play with our toys when we heard yelling from downstairs. It was the hardest time of my life, and now, when I get into arguments, I find it hard to face the problem and actually speak up about it because we never did back then. Story 9. My dad stopped taking his medication when I was in 7th grade, and now I can't respond when a man raises his voice. I also struggle with geometry without becoming emotional. Story 10. Anything related to food brings up difficult memories for me. My body mass index was high as a child. I competitively figure skated for 16 years and had a lot of muscle mass, so doctors advised my mother to help me lose weight. She implemented a 1,400-calorie diet when I was 11 and restricted access to all snacks deemed unhealthy. To this day, she doesn't acknowledge that this was problematic, perhaps because she is currently dieting herself and has eliminated fruits due to their sugar content, projecting her own food issues onto me. I struggle significantly with my relationship with food. Story 11. Being in a constant state of fight or flight, I still haven't figured out how to deal with it. I plan to pass it down as generational trauma. Story 12. I tend to shut down when I am being yelled at or bombarded with questions and accusations, mostly by my parents. It helps that I have moved out and been able to limit interactions a little more. Story 13. I apologize for everything, even when it's not my fault. It is raining outside. I am sorry. The lady did not get my order right. I am sorry. And so on. Story 14. Comforting myself. I grew up in the 1980s and experienced extreme anxiety. Back then, anxiety and panic attacks weren't widely recognized. I cried almost every day at school, couldn't participate in sleepovers with my friends, and was often made to feel like I was just a mommy's girl, facing ridicule from adult family members. To this day, when something bothers me, I withdraw until it passes. I never seek help from others to feel better. Story 15. I don't like to be touched. It's hard with 3 very loving children. I become overstimulated and end up angry and verbally lashing out. I'm working on it. I really am. Story 16. I have an abusive older brother. I set aside one day each year to allow myself to express my feelings toward him without restraint. I know it sounds harsh, but it really helps. I highly recommend it. Story 17. In my childhood household, anger was considered bad and rude. When my mom was upset about something, she would clam up for days at a time. I never knew if she was angry with me or my brother, and if it was me, I was unsure of what I had done. To this day, when someone goes silent or quiet, all my insecurities resurface, and I mentally search for anything I might have done wrong. Story 18. I experience flashbacks and nightmares related to a specific traumatic event. I manage this through medication and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Story 19. When people enter a room loudly and suddenly, it can be alarming. My husband often leaves his office like that, making me jump and freeze while my heart races. Turning on the lights in a dark room without warning is also unsettling. My father used to return home from work in a similar way, often slamming the door as he entered, leaving us unsure of his mood and on edge. If we weren't in the room when he arrived, we could hear his footsteps pounding, making us stop and freeze, hoping he was in a good mood or that the house was tidy enough. He typically came home from his evening shift around 11:30 p.m., and if things weren't up to his standards, he would throw your bedroom door open and turn on the lights. If you managed to get up quickly enough, sometimes he wouldn't physically drag you into the kitchen or living room for a reprimand or punishment. Story 20. I grew up with a narcissistic mother who frequently reminded me that people did not care about my feelings. As an adult, I am out of touch with both my emotional and physical feelings. This makes diagnosing medical concerns extremely difficult. Story 21. I apologize for everything, so I'm not inconvenient. I please others and sacrifice my own well-being to keep them warm. I think if everyone else is happy, they won't be angry with me or abandon me. However, this approach doesn't work in my adult life. I'm exhausted, and I'm not in a good place. I don't know how to stop it. Story 22. Screaming at the television during sports games was something my dad did when he was drunk, and it often got out of hand. It's unfortunate because I also have strong emotional reactions to my team performing well or poorly. However, when my boyfriend does it, like most sports fans, I completely shut down. I don't want him to feel like he needs to stop, so I'm working through it. Story 23. Not an adult yet, but I would say I have to keep the volume low or have one earbud off so I can hear if I'm going to get attacked. I also fake sleep to get away from people, even if I'm not in trouble. Story 24. Avoidant personality and attachment style. When my partner starts yelling, I shut down. I avoid the conflict either by completely shutting down or by giving in. Story 25. I faced significant insecurity during my childhood. I was often bullied and hit puberty quite late, which made things more difficult for me. This led to numerous fights. I worry that I am not likable, good-looking, or intelligent, and deep down, I feel unhappy. Although I have been tested and my standardized scores reflect well on me, and I was even offered modeling opportunities that I declined, I still have a few friends. Despite knowing objectively where I stand, I struggle to shake the feeling that I am not good enough. Fortunately, I married a supportive wife who helps me adopt a more positive outlook. I cope by recalling her encouraging words and putting things into perspective. Still, I find myself needing to remind myself daily that my negative thoughts are not true, which leads to a significant amount of negative thinking throughout the day. Story 26. I am terrified of making an authority figure angry. It goes back to elementary school when teachers used to berate me constantly with yelling and screaming. I am a 39-year-old man, and I still fold at the idea of it. The last time it happened, I was brought to tears at around 26 years old. Now, I do anything I can to avoid that scenario. Story 27. I still carry most of these feelings, and they have worsened over the years. Things like loud noises, yelling, and crowded places create a freeze response or a panic attack. It has happened to me at work multiple times when something falls or someone slams the door too hard, and I start hyperventilating. The constant fear of abandonment influences everything I try to do to avoid it. It has made me overly curious. I want to know every conversation others have had just to ensure it isn't about me. However, this has the opposite effect as people dislike nosy individuals. I don't remember much either. I am in a constant state of dissociation, and my memory is suppressed. I can recall things given the right context, as memories aren't simply erased, but I still cannot name more memories than I have fingers on my hands. It is so difficult that I had a best friend in high school who died of cancer. While I miss her deeply and know she was my best friend, I cannot tell you a single memory of her. This hurts tremendously because her mother would love to hear some fun memories I have of her, and I just can't provide that, despite my desire to. There are many more issues, but these three have the biggest impact on me. There isn't much I can do about it besides working through my trauma, accepting that it happened, recognizing that I am who I am because of it, and trying to identify my triggers to avoid them. Currently, I am trying to accept all of this while going through the grief of realizing just how difficult my life has been, and it hasn't been easy at all. Story 28. Always carry cash and tissues. The trauma response of not having enough money to use a business restroom is memorable. It's circumstantial, of course, but I have never forgotten that. Story 29. I draw my own conclusions to prepare for disappointment before it happens. Due to my fear of abandonment, I find it challenging to address the situation directly. Story 30. Thinking that every gift, act of kindness, or love is conditional and transactional, that people only do something nice for you when they want something in return, makes me feel like I immediately have to repay them or I'll be in some sort of debt. Therapy is helping. I have very loving and patient partners too. Being able to say, hey, sorry, I get awkward when people do nice things for me, and I'm not sure how to express my thanks. I appreciate you, is something I can say now, and that helps too. Story 31. I become unreasonable fearful whenever I think someone is even slightly angry with me, as if they might harm me. Story 32. Not settling for good things because I don't think I deserve them. So if a good person walks into my life, I push them away. If I receive a good job offer, I reject it. If I get invited out, I don't go. Because as a child, I grew up believing good things aren't for me. Story 33. I cry easily. I dislike it intensely. My first instinct is always to hide it from anyone around me and to try to stop. I will lie about it and say it's allergies if anyone asks. I do not want to talk about why I'm crying. Ever. The worst part is that it sometimes happens due to anxiety, and the thought of someone seeing me cry makes me even more anxious. Story 34. My father had a habit of bullying me based on false accusations and cornering me to validate his claims. Once I became nervous and broke eye contact, he would exploit that, claiming I was avoiding his gaze because I was lying. He would then use my tears as an excuse to start the beatings. I am generally comfortable with eye contact. However, during tense conversations with other men, I find myself avoiding eye contact, which builds anger and aggression within me. I am aware of this tendency and can manage it since I once threw a friend through a fence during a drunken argument after he insisted that I look at him when I'm talking to you. Story 35. Growing up as an only child, there were many days when loneliness crept in. I started having imaginary friends and creating scenarios to talk to myself and support my feelings, making myself happy. I still do this as an adult for any issue, discomfort, or feelings of loneliness. It is sad that only imagination feels comfortable and free from fear. Story 36. I grew up concealing our way of life from others because we feared Child Protective Services would take us. I now attend therapy. Story 37. Authority. I still become upset and argumentative when I think things are unfair or when I am being treated unfairly. I tend to speak my mind and often say things out loud to others when I should probably take a deep breath and respond less emotionally. This has sometimes caused me issues with supervisors and colleagues. Story 38. I feel like I have to try to resolve all problems by myself. Letting anyone else know there is a problem is an absolute last resort. This is especially true if the problem might be my fault or if I think someone might criticize how I handled it. We had a cat who would vomit occasionally. If I found vomit, I would clean it up and feel anxious that my husband would find out it had happened again. Story 39. Abusive, intoxicated individuals explicitly told me they were more important than my feelings. In some states, it is completely normal and legal to have children in bars. I lived in one of those states. As a result, I spent too much of my childhood sitting in bars. Story 40. When I was 6 years old, I recognized nausea and vomiting for the first time. I was terrified by the unpredictable, violent process and the unpleasant mess and smell. I spent most of my life purposefully avoiding any possible cause. To date, I haven't had an episode since May of 1984, although I am now better equipped to deal with it. Story 41. Being the negotiator and fixer in every disagreement or problem stems from being used as a weapon between my mother and her mother when I was a child. Story 42. Self-destructiveness arises when I start to feel isolated. When I first began, it was drugs, alcohol, and risky behavior in response to being left alone at home for days in our remote house. Now, I tend to have a few drinks more than once a week. I try not to let that response take over again. I haven't quite figured out why I choose that route, but I think it might be related to seeking some reprieve and numbing the anxiety of being alone. Story 43. Due to never being heard and being accused of things that were not true, I tend to repeat and rephrase my statements, and I may mention them again the next day. At times, I spoke to teachers about my bullies or to my first abuser, or to other abusive individuals who deliberately ignored me as an adult. Sometimes, people become annoyed with me for repeating myself. When I am falsely accused, it affects me even more. Moreover, I often feel frozen in these situations. Story 44. I lost my big brother when I was 12. I live in constant fear of losing people I love, which prevents me from committing to a relationship and keeps my circle of friends very small. I couldn't even find the strength to get a dog until I was in my 40s because they die. Story 45. I feel punished for having negative emotions. I still struggle to express my feelings and to feel safe with the people who love me. Story 46. I had undiagnosed attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder as a child and spent a lot of time with teachers who told me I was lazy and stupid. I was raised by parents who believed anything below a B was unacceptable and would lead to punishment. I am a parent now, and both of my children have been diagnosed and treated for their attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder. However, I experience significant anxiety when attending parent-teacher conferences, even though I am the parent and know that no one is being punished. Story 47. Our father was a heavy drinker, which is why I either completely avoid alcohol or drink excessively. Story 48. This is trivial compared to many stories, but it illustrates how ingrained a bad experience can remain. As a teenager, I visited a dental office with a very rough and inconsiderate hygienist. I never complained because I didn't know any better. The dentist was also the worst I've ever had. I avoided regular dental care for years as an adult, which I managed because I don't seem to get tooth decay. When I finally started going back, I was filled with anxiety until a different, capable hygienist explained what that lady had probably been doing and how it didn't have to hurt. I'm 64 and have been going twice a year for decades, yet I still grip the armrests in fear, although I have never had a similar experience. I just returned from a cleaning today. I had a new hygienist and was terrified all over again, but she was great and it was not bad at all. 50 years later, that bad experience stays with you. Story 49. Due to my childhood environment, my fight or flight response is constantly activated. As a result, I must be careful with everything I do, or I may descend into madness and develop harmful habits. Story 50. My mother ignored me for weeks at a time, not in the sense of being neglected, but by giving me the cold shoulder. She would still make dinner or engage in usual family activities while pretending I didn't exist. She never told me what I did wrong or that she was upset. She just stopped acknowledging me. As a result, I developed an annoying habit of constantly asking people what is wrong or if they are angry at me the moment I notice a slight shift in their energy. Growing up felt like a constant guessing game of what I might have done wrong, forcing me to reanalyze every action or word I had said leading up to it. I tried to deal with it by avoiding assumptions and asking people less frequently. Instead, I wait until they tell me directly if they are upset and grapple with the crippling anxiety of, what if, until it is confirmed. However, this approach has not worked well for me because many people want you to assume they are upset and engage them about it. Story 51. I grew up in a difficult environment, and my father had a friend who was a serial killer, convicted decades later. I faced verbal and physical abuse. I cannot say I have handled it well. I am 54 years old, and the trauma did not end until my 20s, and that is not even everything. I wish I could find a therapist who understands attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder on the days I still want to keep going. Most days I feel like I want to give up, but I know I am not alone, and my choices can affect others. Why spread trauma just because I seem to collect it? Story 52. I am very sensitive to things like tone, attitude, noise from doors, cabinets, and footsteps. I rarely close doors without turning the knob all the way and closing them softly to avoid noise. I close cabinets with my hand holding them until they are quiet. I do the same in public, whether it is an entrance door or a door on a supermarket fridge or freezer. It feels like if I know people are around, I need to avoid being seen. I am a very light sleeper to the point where it often feels like I was never asleep. I can make up small lies very quickly. The biggest issue is probably my inability to ask for help or talk about what is on my mind. I genuinely struggle to see how anyone other than myself can help me with something. Story 53, born in Iran. I remember the bomb sirens in the middle of the night in the early 1980s. Running down to the underground garage of the apartment building with the other neighbors. I am still hypervigilant in my 40s. I notice every door closing, every unfamiliar noise, and still feel stressed at the thought of harsh weather, natural disasters, or a global pandemic. Story 54. I used to cry at the drop of a hat. Arguing with a boyfriend, tears would flow. If a boss made some kind of complaint or criticism about me, instant tears. Now that I'm on Lexapro and some other depression and anxiety medications, I barely cry at all. At times when it would be appropriate to cry, nothing happens. Although sometimes when I'm driving or at home and I have memories of my parents or my kids, I'll notice some tears start to fall. However, when people told me my aunt died recently, not a tear fell. I lost my job over some false accusations, and I didn't cry. If I had a manager telling me I was going to be let go, I would usually be in the office sobbing and have to take 30 minutes afterward before I could walk out because my face would be all puffy. The medications definitely help with that. Story 55. Avoidance of any issues. I had a variety of traumas in childhood, including abuse and abandonment. My mother would take me to stay at her mother's house if she had problems with her boyfriend. When I faced issues she didn't know how to handle, she would lash out at me or entirely push me away. When I was 14 and announced that I was moving out to live with my father, she locked herself in her room and didn't speak to me for days. I wouldn't say I share her level of avoidance, and I try to make it a point to confront issues directly, but I struggle significantly with interpersonal conflict. I would prefer to avoid it altogether rather than address it. Story 56. I don't like being touched. Yelling makes me flinch. I don't respond. I just silently panic and move on. Story 57. Up until I was about 12 years old, whenever I acted out, my mom would threaten to call the police and even took me to the local juvenile facility overnight. My acting out mainly consisted of crying and talking back. If it wasn't that, she would make me weed the backyard and go to sleep without food. Almost 20 years later, she wonders why I don't stay in contact. As a result, I feel I can no longer express my emotions without facing significant repercussions. Story 58. Not communicating my problems properly and isolating myself during any direct confrontation. Story 59. Hearing voices through walls makes it difficult for me to concentrate on the current situation. Knowing that what is happening outside means I will walk into a destroyed house adds to my distress. I remember being in therapy and unable to focus on the therapist because the voices in the other room were distracting. My honesty didn't go well, and I ended up quitting therapy due to the therapist's reaction. It was a challenging environment, and I never returned to that campus afterward. Fortunately, I later found an amazing therapist who helped me make my first breakthrough. Story 60. Fear of abandonment. My mother was never around, and when she was very affectionate, then left without a trace. I go to therapy for it. Story 61. When I was abused as a child and got my hopes up about things, I would rarely not be let down. Therefore, I don't trust people and I have strong trust issues. Throughout my entire adolescence, everyone I cared about either left or died. So now I try to avoid becoming close to others as a means of self-protection. I would only break that rule for animals. My pets are the only beings I give my whole heart to. Everyone else can mean nothing or close to nothing to me because if they mean something, it will hurt when they leave, not if they leave, but when they leave. That perfect strategy or trauma response to avoid emotional pain kind of self-destructed recently when I fell in love. I realized that I can't be this way forever. My goal in life is to have no regrets, and sabotaging every good relationship goes against that. Story 62. Self-mocking by family, some form of neglect and abuse due to my grades, feeling different from others and struggling to get along with people, bullying for various reasons, hitting puberty and realizing I am not like everyone else in terms of sexuality. I don't want to talk about my life or make excuses. I just expressed what came to mind. Story 63. When things were dropped or slammed out of anger or frustration, I would immediately experience panic attacks. Growing up, this was the precursor to a lot of pain and punishment for me. My husband once had an incident in the kitchen early in our relationship where he had to slam something in pain and swore a lot. This made me tense up and go silent, but he noticed. Once I was able to, I told him I didn't like that because it triggered me and he never did it again. This alone made me feel safe enough to breathe through similar situations with others for different reasons. In a way, it felt like I was given permission to feel safe. I felt supported, validated, and seen, which made me feel capable of handling it. Now I no longer have panic attacks, but I do flinch slightly. However, I am now able to breathe through it, whereas before it would have resulted in a panic attack. Story 64. I grew up in a domestically violent household. I pushed it back during my 20s, but the trauma resurfaced once I had children. I am conflict avoidant, unless I feel the women around me are being threatened. Then I become very protective, saying that I do feel sad that my childhood was marked by trauma. I do everything my dad didn't and have realized that I resented my mom for not leaving and protecting us. With my own kids, I try to be the parent I needed. They are doing well, but they will never know the pain I carry. Story 65. Avoiding any form of conflict or starting a fight has been a challenge for me. My parents used to argue frequently, creating a tense atmosphere in the house. As a result of this experience, I tense up quickly, get upset easily, and flinch when people start yelling at me. I dislike it because I am often perceived as overly emotional or someone who cannot control her feelings. My older sister mocks me for this, often saying, "I can't even have an argument with you without you breaking down and getting upset." However, I do not do it for attention or to make her feel guilty. I simply cannot control my reactions. When I talk to my mom about it, she advises me to toughen up, but it's not easy. They make it seem simple, yet they have never experienced what I go through during an argument. I feel tightness in my chest, my throat starts to close, and it becomes hard for me to speak. Nowadays, I have to isolate myself quickly and distract my mind by reading or engaging in something productive, so I can be in the right headspace to return and converse with others. Story 66. My father once told me a story about giving my mother a sexually transmitted disease and spiking her pina coladas with tetracycline. He is a truly terrible person. Story 67. Having to fight to get what you want is challenging. Whenever I wanted something that was not legally required, like food, clothes, or educational materials, I had to negotiate for it, even if I bought it with my own money as I got older. If I didn't have a strong enough reason, my requests were often dismissed or rejected. Now, when I discuss something I desire with my partner, I find myself preparing for another argument, even though they will likely either agree or suggest I wait until the next paycheck. Story 68. I can't look people in the eyes because it is often seen as an invitation for bullying. I still struggle with making eye contact. Story 69. I do not see doctors easily. My wife has to encourage me. My brother has many medical problems, making my own seem minor in comparison, and my parents did not take them seriously. My mother once told me I was making myself weird when I started showing signs of bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, making it hard to determine which developed first. Something I should discuss with a professional. I experienced debilitating migraines, severe mental health issues, a rare physical disability, and possible neurological problems. None of it feels serious enough to seek medical attention. I don't know where I would be without my wife's support in taking care of myself. Story 70. I check the room tone by walking past my husband and saying, "I love you," to gauge his tone of voice. I want to determine if he is upset or not. For your information, he is never upset. I grew up with a parent who was never happy. Story 71. Has anyone else read Because a Little Bug Went Cuckoo? I just read that book again with my children, and I believe my tendency to catastrophize originates from it. Story 72. I was bullied at home, at school, and by my cousins, belittled by my aunts and uncles, and my cries for help were ignored by my parents. I have never felt safe or wanted and have never trusted anyone. It's very hard. Understanding my trauma has helped me cope, and years of surviving on my own have made me independent, confident, and resilient against bullies. However, I also don't connect with anyone and actively avoid relationships because I lose interest after a few months. I have always had strong, rigid, altruistic ideals, and they have really guided me. Always striving to be better and to be the person I wish I had growing up has helped me be functional and beneficial to society. I'm slowly getting better. I recently developed feelings for a coworker, and I thought we were really close, but then they started dating their ex again. It really hurt and shocked me, as the emotions completely snuck up on me. I didn't even realize I had developed feelings for them until they diverted all their attention to their ex. But it was a deeply satisfying realization that I still had the capacity for attachment, even if it was one-sided. Story 73. The smell of marijuana in my house almost always makes me feel like a little girl who had to be quiet, out of the way, behaved, secretive, and walk on eggshells to keep the beast at bay. The smell of marijuana doesn't emotionally trigger me anywhere else. I smoke myself, but when my home smells of it, I'm constantly sent into fight or flight. I remind myself that I am safe, that this is my home, and I can do whatever I want here. But the smell association is strong. My partner and I have stopped smoking inside to help combat this, and it has definitely helped. Story 74. This isn't constant but does flare up occasionally. If anyone shows any desire to be around me, I tend to question their motives, wondering if it is out of pity, obligation, a reminder of my dad, or to lure me in. In other words, none of it is because of something I personally contribute. Similarly, hearing or seeing someone laugh can lead to the thought that they are laughing at you. Story 75. The bullies at my school would deliberately target anyone I talked to or associated with. 25 years later, I wake up every day knowing that the few friends I have could be gone for any reason or no reason at all in an instant. I also don't trust anyone who talks to me unless I know what they want. If I don't know their intentions, I can't gauge how much they might hurt me to get it. Story 76. I was betrayed by my friends. I was tied to a tree and beaten with a stick because I was different from them. I have trust issues. Story 77. I assume that every friendship is inauthentic and that they do not actually like me. My mom repeatedly told me when I was younger that people were making fun of me behind my back, and she questioned whether they were truly my friends. Story 78. Being quiet and listening to people and footfalls, I can tell who is coming by how they walk. I can also discern different levels of quiet. Story 79. When I was a child, I often got yelled at by my dad. He was an amazing father who did everything he could for our family. I was just a troubled kid. When he yelled at me, he would raise his voice significantly, and since it happened frequently, I found myself reacting strongly and flinching whenever someone raised their voice. It instantly made my heart race, and I felt scared. Story 80. I grew up with an abusive father. Whenever someone yells, my eyes tear up. Even though I get angry and defend myself, it seems like I'm still scared, and my voice breaks when I try to yell back. Story 81. Fear of abandonment. I suffered through neglect and witnessed violence towards my mother, whom I eventually decided could not take care of me at the age of 4. So I moved in with my grandparents. It took about another 24 years before I began to realize I had traumatic experiences and that I was acting out behaviors because of them. Some of those behaviors, I'm ashamed to admit, were not much different from what I grew up with, screaming and yelling during arguments. It took a lot to break free from them. Story 82. Immediately jumping to defend myself almost aggressively when someone challenges or corrects what I said, even if I turn out to be wrong. I was belittled and made fun of for everything I got wrong as a child, and if I voiced any discomfort about my family's behavior, I would either get punished, labeled selfish, or manipulated into believing that I was, once again, wrong. Trying to eliminate this defense mechanism is difficult, but at least I am now fairly skilled at debates and arguments on topics I have researched. Story 83. My dad has had 3 marriages, during which I often found myself as the messenger during their arguments, whether they were together or separated. As a child and teen, I regularly experienced the anger they felt toward each other directed at me through shouting and verbal abuse. I became quite skilled at diffusing arguments I shouldn't have been involved in at a young age. As an adult, I am adept at talking myself out of situations and mediating arguments between friends. However, I also have a diagnosed anxiety disorder, difficulties reaching out and making new friends, and challenges with commitment and dating. Witnessing terrible relationships throughout my life has made me feel quite cynical about love and marriage. Story 84. Never reaching out for help or support was a challenge for me. My mother likely has a personality disorder, and growing up, she was often irrational and emotionally unstable. Whenever I expressed that something was wrong, it quickly became about her pain and how sad she felt that I was hurting. This created an emotional burden, leading me to stop sharing my feelings. It wasn't until a therapy appointment as an adult that I considered reaching out for support when my therapist asked who I had contacted for help. Story 85. I was accidentally drowned by my father when I was young because he was just playing. I love to swim, but I don't like it when people get near me in the water or try to roughhouse. Story 86. I grew up in an abusive household, which resulted in a dissociative disorder. This has followed me into adulthood, and there are many consequences to deal with. I am in therapy and will likely continue for some time. Story 87. I won't give people the attention they seek, and I can't eat or sleep around others. I eat last and sleep when others sleep, and the slightest noise makes me fully alert. Story 88. I'm unsure of what exactly caused it, but having serious conversations where I need to express my feelings instantly makes my eyes water, and I begin to cry. I may not even be sad or fighting. It's just so difficult that I can't help it. I've talked it out with my boyfriend, letting him know it's not personal or related to the argument we are having. It's just a response that I need to work on improving. He helps a lot. Story 89. I don't know how to be proud of my own achievements. I cannot maintain a serious relationship for more than 6 months. I also don't know how to put my own needs first or find enjoyment in things. I don't deal with these feelings, and it is a significant issue, which is why I am finally getting therapy in a couple of weeks after 12 years of trying. Story 90. I went to a friend's house when I was 10 years old. She and her family were all crazy. I was horribly exploited and was told things like, "You'll never be enough. Nobody will ever want you. And we're all you've got." To this day, if anybody leaves me out, tells me I'm not doing something right, or says I'm not wanted, I have an absolute meltdown. I've tried to find coping mechanisms, but nothing seems to work. I just start hyperventilating and usually end up on the ground, crying and throwing up until I pass out. So hard. With that being said, I've forgiven the people who hurt me. I think it taught me a lot about empathy for others and the importance of making everyone feel included. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.